still be
I
coming
know,
in.
yeah.
I would be surprised if someone did not.
Heather, have you heard from Becky?
Because as the incumbent, you have an advantage.
We're gonna go ahead and get started at 6:01. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will now call to order the study session meeting of May 15th, 2023. Members of the public are invited to attend in-person city council meetings in council chambers on the lower level of City Hall. Public access to tonight's meeting is also available on the Local Government Access Channel 8 for Comcast subscribers, on the city's YouTube channel online, and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Lisa, welcome. Will you call the roll, please?
Thank you, of course. Mayor Lighty.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Luke Manhuramasa will be absent. Councilmember Long.
Here?
Councilmember Jaramillo.
Here.
Councilmember Kondo.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Goff.
Here.
Councilmember Brown will be absent. And Councilmember Walker will be absent.
Okay. All right, we have two items on our study session tonight. The first one is the year-end 2022 and quarter one 2023 Economic Development and NURA reports. Allison Moding, our Director of Economic Development, and NURA Executive Director will present to council. Hi.
Thank you so much. I want to say good evening, Mayor and City Council. We are here tonight to present some fabulous statistics about economic development and urban renewal for the city of North Glen through 2022, and we'll also give a sneak preview of how 2023 is shaping up. I do want to take just a moment to recognize a few folks that are here with us tonight. We do have our NURA Board Chair, Rosie Gardner, here, and Jerry. Jerry, pronounce your last name for me, Gavette. So I'm very pleased that they could be here tonight as well. Shannon Fields is has really helped me get up to speed and get things rolling so far. So I'm very appreciative to Shannon for all of her help in putting this report together tonight. I know we have some limited time, so I want to just jump right in. And we'll start off with our economic indicators from 2022. These are metrics that I understand we have tracked from year to year just to give us an idea of where we are each year. For 2022, we showed that North Glen absorbed almost 188,000 square feet of retail, office, and industrial product. That included 67 new businesses, 46 of which were storefront businesses. The other 21 were home-based. And together they added 211 new jobs in those storefronts. We worked directly with 50 of those new businesses as prospects. And at the same time, we conducted 115 business retention activities to support our existing network of businesses. I mentioned new businesses, and we did in our city statistics here. This kind of gives you a little sneak peek of our demographics, our population. These are numbers that we share in different opportunities, just to give people an idea of what North Glen has to offer. And then we're going to jump into our ribbon cuttings. In 2022, we did 16 ribbon cuttings. And I'm going to just scroll through these. If you look really close, you'll probably see some familiar faces in there. Ribbon cuttings are important, I think, from an opportunity to really show our new businesses that we're paying attention. We want to get to know them. It gives us that face-to-face connection with those business owners. And as they're kind of coming through the development process, I think it's a great way to celebrate their accomplishments in opening up their businesses. We always, of course, welcome the council members to join us any chance you get. We try to schedule these late in the afternoons and have these at a time when as many of you as possible can join us, but we also try to match the business owners' schedules as well. So these are just the quarterly ribbon cuttings that we did throughout 2022. Next on the screen, you'll see the results of our 2022 business survey. This was our 9th survey. This is a survey that goes out to all North Glen businesses. It is done online. We received 82 responses, and there's just a snapshot of some of the answers, some of the collective responses that we received from businesses. Generally, we're trying to gauge and gather information about what businesses think about their potential revenues, what workforce looks like for them, plans for expansion. It's kind of a little insight into what our businesses are thinking and what they're planning to do. So the 2023 survey will be going out in June, and typically those questions are all similar from year to year, so we can track annually what those responses look like. So we talked earlier about new businesses, and this slide has just a little bit more detail about our new business statistics. All new businesses in 2022, we had 67 with 237 new jobs and 187,734 square feet of commercial space absorbed. That was offset, of course, by businesses that closed their doors through that same time period. So we had a net total of 8 in 2022 with also 68 new jobs and just over 40,000 square feet absorbed in the community. Obviously, we like to see those numbers where we have more, where we end up on the positive side, and that new businesses are able to move in when other businesses choose to close their doors. And then looking at 2023 so far, we've seen 10 new storefronts, bringing 40 new jobs and 6,300 square feet absorbed. Again, offset by 9 closed businesses, the loss of 19 jobs, and the loss of about 11,000 square feet. So it's early in the year. We'll see how those numbers turn out for the remainder of 2023. And I should mention, if at any point in this you want to stop me and ask questions, please do. Don't feel like you have to wait till the
Okay,
end.
Councilmember Kondo has a question.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I wonder if we can go back to slide 19. Actually, 2 questions on that. How many businesses are there total in North Glen? Just so that I can get level set.
Around 1,000. I don't have an exact number for you.
Okay,
Probably a good thing to have.
so did we send out the survey to all 1,000? Because I'm just trying to understand in the context, 82 responses, if that is considered statistically significant or.
I think that's fairly standard with our previous surveys, my understanding. That's a pretty routine response that we get. I think we're always looking for ways to get and encourage more responses. And so I think in this year's survey, we'll be looking at ways we can encourage and ask for more survey. I think the response rate then was around, 8.2%.
Yeah,
There's
8.2.
1,000 businesses, right?
So, and the more important question is on slide 19 or page 19 of the pack. So top 5 challenges, I find it interesting that staffing is not among the top 5. So that's a little bit of a head scratcher for me, because as a city, our police department, we're suffering, we struggle to get new officers, or, it's hard recruiting in the municipal world. So I'm just trying to figure out in the commercial world, how hard is it that they're having difficulties finding new people?
That might be something interesting that we can dig into in this year's survey. I would say it probably depends greatly on the nature of the businesses that did respond. If you're looking at, I would say businesses that are more family, not maybe dependent on outside hiring, that probably is not as much an issue. But if you talk to retailers or restaurants, I think that you would see that might be more of a challenge. So perhaps that's something that we can dig
Okay.
into
Yeah,
a little more.
don't
with
need
this
an
year's-
answer to that.
No, it's interesting information to have.
It certainly is. And then just a brain thought, but, it seems to me there's opportunities to be able to, as a city, help build connections with maybe Adams 12 and other sources of potential employees. And so maybe that's something that we could look at is continuing to be the social lubricant to help our businesses find sources of people that could potentially work in their businesses. I know that for example, Dr. Goff, you and I and Shannon, we toured Murray Brown Labs last week, and that was really fascinating. And I just couldn't help myself but just think about, if they needed to grow and expand, where do they reach out and find new employees? So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Councilmember Goff?
Thank you. So mine's just really quick, and I'm glad we have this one up. The little pie chart on the bottom, I know it's really hard to see, but, and you probably can't say how pros answered it. But I'm just wondering, what business like that, what does that qualify? Service, manufacturing, distribution, restaurant, or is it both?
Well, I would say both
Okay.
if it were, so it might depend. In some cases, it depends on who within the company answers the survey, to be
Because
honest.
that's a big space.
Yeah.
Period. Thank you.
Right, well, let's move on, if I can figure out where I was here. So speaking of commercial real estate, we do track vacancy rates and sort of the number of properties that we have in the three primary categories of commercial real estate, office, industrial, retail. There's also some specialty categories that will fall in here sometimes. Medical sometimes gets broken out separately, but office is obviously our smallest number of properties with 35. Currently, that's about a 7.3 vacancy rate as of the end of the first quarter of 2023. Of course, we've all heard that office is struggling in many places. I think Northglenn might be a little bit different just because we tend to have smaller office spaces and fewer of them. But the average full-service lease rate there is $22.89. Retail, or the industrial, I wanted to mention, that's a higher vacancy rate than we've typically seen. We did have one property that did come vacant in the first quarter that skewed that number up a little bit, the O'Mara Collision Repair facility, so that's a little higher than normal. And then for retail, 6.3% vacancy rate over really a lot of square feet. So I think that's a pretty competitive number. It says a lot about our retail product. Sales tax history, obviously, a big part of economic development is about generating sales tax. And so 2022 reported $25.8 million in sales tax collected. You can see that number did jump in 2021 and 2022. Unemployment rates have obviously been up and down an awful lot over the last few years, and so this year's rate, 2.6%, kind of among one of the lowest that we've seen in the last decade. So that is both a blessing and a curse, as we mentioned, sometimes makes it difficult to find workers, but also I think is a good sign that things are going well. Commercial building permit valuations, this is something that we've looked at each year, up just slightly this year over last year. So again, big years in 2021 and 22, and I think certainly with Carl's Farm and ongoing activities at Northland Marketplace, we'll see those numbers this year being good numbers. Ta-da. All right, before I switch over to NERA, any questions? The council memo does, I admit, have lots and lots more detail in it. I didn't want to get too deep into any of that unless there are specific parts of that are of interest to you. But I was very impressed by how much data and how many statistics we're tracking. We're looking at social media. We're looking at just a lot of different things that all kind of go into the economic development formula. So trying to keep an eye on what's happening here in Northland. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about our indicators for 2022 through NERA. We leveraged $2.4 million of private sector investment with our NERA investment. That led us to 87 new and retained jobs and improving 284,826 square feet of commercial space. And then total business grants of $136,081. So those are our big and our BUAG grants that go toward permanent improvements to businesses that need grease traps or need other infrastructure improvements, but also help to ensure that we have quality signage, that we have shopping areas that are attractive, and really helping those business owners make things look nice and attract more customers. This is a nifty little pie chart that shows the reinvestment by project category going all the way back to 1995. So you can see we have significant investments through land acquisition and getting property ready to redevelop. So all the work that goes into getting a project like Northland Marketplace ready to redevelop. The consulting and studies piece is a tiny little piece, but I think that that's a necessary element of that process of making sure that our projects make sense. And then the business grants as well I apologize, the colors are a little tough to see here, but definitely an indicator of the impact that NERA has had over the past 27 years, which I think is pretty impressive. Got a list of our NERA grants here. And in 2022, these are the companies that we worked with, the businesses that we work with to establish the BIG and the BUAG grants. You can see that these are all up to $12,500 are the amounts that we typically can give for each of these grants. They are matching grants that allow these businesses to share in the cost of improvements to their properties. And so from there, we'll talk a little bit about our current NERA projects. So as mentioned before, PROST and the continued work, the Northland Marketplace redevelopment and revitalization. Our partners at HCP continue to be working hard to fill vacancies, to recruit new tenants and new prospects for the shopping center. PROST, of course, we are working with them to put the final touches on their project as they're working very feverishly toward an August opening date. 112th Avenue and Irma Drive is another focus that has come to NERA in the last year. We've currently acquired 2 properties in that general area. We're under contract on a 3rd property and considering a 4th that would give us approximately a 2-acre development site. We would put out an RFP to gauge development interest on that site and consider proposals for the highest and best use of that property. And then ongoing is our project at 112th and Washington Street. We had hoped that project would be underway by now, but the developer continues to sort of make some adjustments to the site plan so that that project can cash flow so that it can meet all of the city's requirements. And so we're getting pretty close on that one. And then again, we expect from this first quarter of 2023, working toward that opening date in August and looking at what else is ahead for NERA. And I think that brings me to the close. What else could I answer for you? I'll tell you that this has been a great exercise for me. I'm just over into my first month, and I'm going through some of this data, and the past activity has really been helpful to get a sense of all the work that goes on, both on the economic development side and the NERA side. So that is all I have.
Councilmember Kondo.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm going to ask to go back to slide number 22. So on that slide, it shows there's 232 properties. So in my mind, earlier you said we have about 1,000 businesses. So subtracting out the 30 or so businesses and homes, that means there's 970 some businesses scattered among 232 properties. Is that a good way for me to think about that?
That's probably a safe assumption. I think we have some places where we do have multiple businesses inside the same space. I've seen that in like medical spas where you have individual different types of surgeons or estheticians working at the same address.
Yeah.
But generally, yeah, I think that's a safe
So,
bet.
say for example, the Marketplace HCP managed, is that considered one property, or are those multiple properties
There's
in there?
multiple properties there. Mhm.
Okay, gotcha. So it's not easy to just kind of drive around and look and say, oh, yeah, that's one
Right.
property, and,
Yep.
okay.
And to be honest, I think a lot of this information comes from the CoStar Commercial Real Estate Database. And so in some cases, sometimes we see that their data doesn't always keep up with our data as spaces maybe get subdivided or spaces get, put together. And so 3 spaces become 1. So we do try to, or at least I try to work with them and say, as I see things that aren't quite accurate, to make sure they're updating their records. That's a constant process of,
Well, life is complicated, but it certainly helps me kind of think about these sort of things, because it's like, yeah, you're driving around, I'm not quite sure how to kind of parse everything out. I will make one statement, which is, I would encourage anybody to go to Mercedes Restaurant, which is off of Irma and 112th. I've heard that you're going to try and find a new home for them,
we are, yep.
but it is one of my favorite Mexican restaurants.
What do you recommend there?
First of all, they sell a dozen frozen tamales, so if you love tamales and you don't want to make them par excellence, and if you like smothered burritos, I know you do.
There's some options in Ward 2 that.
I can also say,
Am I
I'll say
totally
that,
insulting you by?
That's
no, I think
by
Ward 2
doing
has
happy
some really,
Mercedes?
but
Some of the
I
best
must
in
say
the region, I'm gonna
Mercedes
say
is
that.
a really good restaurant. I'm glad they're going to stick around, but definitely try it for those of you who like Mexican food, like I do.
Right, Councilmember Long?
I noticed you, in your presentation, you mentioned you're buying up 3 lots to have an acquisition of up to 2 acres, something. Did you have to declare eminent domain or put those on a blighted status? Or are you just buying them outright in the commercial competitive market?
Yep, on an open market basis, we're negotiating. I'm not sure, in the case of the 2 we've already purchased, if they were, I don't believe they were on the market. We may have approached the buyers about purchasing those. In some cases, we are approached by property owners to ask if we'd be interested in purchasing them, but typically we're looking at those as full fair market value and.
And my follow-up is, how many sub-area set-aside areas do you have for improvement? You got 6 or 8 now. You had 6 before, then you went to 8, as I recall, or not?
I'll have to
The
check on that
sub-areas
to be sure,
that you've,
yeah. We'll have to check on that, I think. I'm not.
I'm not sure what you mean by sub-areas.
In each of the 2 URA.
you defined your zones for blighted areas for development in the past. As identified urban renewal sites for development.
I'm going to pull up the map here if I can. I bet you I can find it pretty quickly.
I'm probably not using the
Allison
same.
Corey can.
Corey says 5.
Plant? What's the right word to use?
Plan areas, and in a couple of cases, there's separate TIF areas within a plan area.
That's what I was looking for, is the TIF.
Yeah.
And one other thing, if I could, Councilmember Long, that NURA could not currently condemn any property, could not exercise eminent domain without coming to council, because the urban renewal plans are more than, the blight determinations are more than 7 years old, and so you would have to come back to council in the event NURA ever wanted to consider eminent domain, and to my knowledge, it hasn't considered it in many, many years.
I think there was a threat with Huron,
Right.
the Huron Center.
Correct.
They cooperated.
Yes.
And with Huron Center, they would have had to come back to council. So
Sure.
it would have had to come back for a
Sure.
new blight determination.
Sure. And if any TIF determinations, you'd have to invite other special district representation in on those conversations, correct?
If the city council were to consider adopting a new plan or substantially modifying an existing plan, then yes, it would have to come into compliance with House Bill 1348, which would involve 4 new members, a member appointed by the Board of County Commissioners of Adams County, a member appointed to represent all of the special districts, a member from the Board of Education, and then a 4th member to be appointed by the mayor to keep the odd number of NERA commissioners.
Thank you. Thank you for updating my understanding. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Jaramillo.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I love the optimistic outlook on the next year with economic development. And thank you, Nura, for the work that you've done to help create Northland to have all these great businesses that we celebrate here. And also encourage everybody to continue to shop Northland and keep your money here. I mean, that's here in Northland, So also, I want to ask, what is the square footage on the 112th in Washington? Is it going to be office space?
It is. I don't know that I could take that, but I can certainly provide that to you. I've looked at it 100 times. I just can't remember
They've
the,
modified it, so we can get you that number.
It's about 2 stories then we're looking at, or one-
single
Single?
single
Yeah.
story.
Oh, okay. I know they had other sections that had like 2 stories and, okay. And also, will that 2-acre development on 112th and Irma, are you looking for it to be part of that special district along Irma? Will it still have that designation? The other multi-use corridor, is that planning,
So that's for zoning purposes,
Uh-huh.
so,
will it have that?
I think it'll be interesting to see, based on our zoning code,
Uh-huh.
what developers might propose for that use. Could it be, could it be office? Could it be retail? Could it be mixed use? I mean, we don't know what they might come back
Options.
with, so.
Right, okay.
That's kind
cool.
of the fun of the process, to see what
Yeah,
creative
that's-
ideas the development community can bring to us.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's always been like a sleepy corner. Like historically, I haven't really seen too much activity there. So I think that's very exciting.
And I
Thank
think
you.
we would promote, that is very much close to a lot of employment in the industrial areas. And so I think trying to, and with the light rail just really down the street, I think there could be some good, good opportunities for that.
Definitely. Thank you.
Councilmember Long.
I have one more curiosity question. You mentioned the light rail, and we know the terminus one day will end at that section 36. Does NERA have any crystal ball or any involvement possibly in section 36 in the future?
Well, it would be ag land, largely, which would create additional hurdles to doing urban renewal in Section 36, but it is certainly a possibility. And remember that it is city council ultimately that determines whether to evaluate an area for urban renewal, and it is a city council decision to ultimately adopt a plan, and it's NERA's job to implement the plan of the city.
So let me get this right. The impetus, if NERA had any thought to maybe do this, they couldn't just present it to city council? City council?
No, they certainly could. They certainly could, but it is ultimately a city council determination of whether to adopt a plan.
Okay.
Councilmember Kondo.
Yes, question for Corey. You said the word ag land. I just wanted to make sure I understand the meaning of agricultural land.
It is-
Or is there a special meaning?
Yeah, it is land that is assessed as agricultural as opposed to zoned. And the reason that's important is in the urban renewal context, if property is zoned agricultural, that creates a disproportionately low base value. And so the statute was amended several years ago to say that you can't use the agricultural land value as the base. It has to be market value. And there is a bill currently on the governor's desk, Senate Bill 273, to my knowledge, at least as of last Friday, he had not yet signed it, that addresses agricultural land, because it's a very controversial issue, because it is seen as, many see it as not truly blighted when it is agricultural land.
Is the definition of agricultural land essentially just dirt?
No, it is
For the
actually
purposes of
assessed ag. So
Oh, okay.
you could be zoned, for example, commercial, but if the property is undeveloped and you're actually running cattle out there, it can still be assessed by the assessor as agricultural, and that's what the definition is premised on.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all we have. Thank you so much.
Very much. Appreciate your time.
All right, next up is the Stanley Lake Regional Park Security Assessment. Tamara Moon, our environmental manager, will present to council. Hello.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm actually going to not talk a whole lot this evening about the Stanley Lake Security Assessment and that subject. With me this evening, I have Shawnee Klein from Corona Environmental and David Wallace and Chris Shartal. Did I say it? Shartal? There we go. Hey. From Surveillance One. They're the consultants that worked with cities of Thornton, North Glen, and Westminster on the Stanley Lake Security Assessment. Just a reminder for all of you, this assessment came up after we had a number of boaters on Stanley Lake that bypassed the quarantine and tagging system and took boats from Stanley Lake to waters that had zebra and quagga mussels, and then brought them back to Stanley Lake. And so the cities brought these two consultants on board to give us some idea of really what our risk is and how we protect our water supply better from invasive species and other sorts of risks and potential harm that could come to our water supply. So I am going to hand over the presentation to Shawnee, and let's see. Lisa, is the.
Should be
just
next slide.
No, one more.
There you go.
There we go. So this is Shawnee Klein from Corona Environmental.
Hello,
Hi.
as she said, I am Shawnee Klein with Corona Environmental. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the assessment that we did last year in 2022. So let's see if I can actually get this rolling correctly. Yes, look at me go. Awesome. So yeah, my entire purpose for being here tonight is to go over with you the report that I think you probably have in your hands. It was rather extensive, and so if you didn't read the whole thing, I don't blame you. We had lots of fun writing it though. But I want to hit on some of the key points, because as you guys all know, your drinking water happens to be probably your most valuable asset that you own. And so we want to just be able to share with you a little bit about what we found with respect to Stanley Lake, and in particular, the protection of the lake. So here's kind of a little overview. Tammy gave a nice little background update, but I'll give you a little bit more about why we were pulled into this, and then talk to you a tad bit about the Stanley Lake ownership and management. You may or may not understand how that works. In fact, it was eye-opening for me, and I've been in this area for a while. And then we're going to talk about first of all, I want to be able to share with you what we found out that's really great about the lake, because I think when you're doing these assessments, everybody's like, okay, so tell us what's wrong. But I think it's really important to focus on what is right about what is going on at that lake. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then we're definitely going to talk about boating at Stanley Lake. So a part of what was an add-on that was actually paid for entirely by the city of Westminster was a boating report that was done. So our colleague that we brought on to actually do the aquatic nuisance species aspect of this, as well as the boating report, her name is Elizabeth Brown. She has her own consulting firm. It's called Elizabeth Brown Environmental Consultants. And she, in addition to helping private and public landowners and water owners assess ANS, she started working for the Colorado, for the Division of Wildlife on their ANS program in 2008 and went all the way through 2020 and did that. So she's got a touch of experience doing this, so she's a good person to listen to. So I'm going to move right along. Now, I don't know if y'all have been out to Stanley Lake. I'm hoping so, yeah. So most of the people that have been out to Stanley Lake, they recognize it as a great place for recreation, and that is really what folks think of. They also recognize it as a wildlife refuge because there is, a bird cam out there, and people do enjoy going and walking around the lake and seeing all the wildlife that's out there. What a lot of people don't realize, however, is that is a primary and sole drinking water source, and I don't have to tell you this, you know this, for the city of North Glen, also the city of Westminster, and it is one of the primary drinking water sources for the city of Thornton. So there's roughly over 350,000 people in the metro area relying on the water in that lake for drinking water, which happens to be no small deal. Now, the folks that were with the cities, all three of those cities, really had an appreciation for the fact that managing the water quality in that lake was super important. So as development started to really grow along the Front Range in the 1980s and 1990s, and also up into Clear Creek, everybody got together and they're like, we really need to make sure that we're protecting water quality in this lake. And so there's two really key reasons for protecting water quality, and that is that it is an industry standard in the water sector that has recognized that protection of water quality is your first line of defense in protecting public health. And then the other thing that is incredibly important, and I think a lot of times is missed, is that if you are protecting the water supply and your water quality, what you're ultimately doing is you're saving your ratepayers money, because in the long run, it's going to cost a whole lot less to treat. So you had a lot of forethinking, which was really important. So with these shared reasons, all of the three cities got together and they're like, we need to do something. I have to say, I work with water utilities across the country, and it has been so awesome to, first of all, live in an area where there is the type of collaboration that takes place to protect a water source. And so it was in November of 1994 that the first intergovernmental agreement was signed, and that was an agreement that had a 25-year term, and that the sole purpose of it was to work together to monitor the lake and to monitor water quality. And then when that 25-year term came up in 2019, some of you might have been sitting there when that first came across, and it was recognized, we want a little bit more time to renegotiate some of the terms. And so there was a short amendment that was done, and then in November 18th of 2020, there was a second amendment that was actually signed, and it was agreed upon. And so this is the important part. There were a few revisions that were included in that. One of the revisions was the funding of this security audit. And so that was a part of what y'all agreed to back then. And the point of that was to identify unmitigated threats to water quality and physical security at the lake. So the information that comes from this report, and I'm happy to say I'm already seeing movement, which, by the way, as a consultant, almost never happens this fast. So hats off to you, but the whole goal of it was to take the information and then use it for proactive planning and implementation measures. So myself, Corona Environmental, I have two other colleagues that helped with this project that are with Corona Environmental Consulting, Elizabeth Brown, and then of course Surveillance One that's here. Corona and Elizabeth Brown Consulting, we did the majority of the water quality review of it and also the aquatic nuisance species. And then Surveillance One, they're going to present to you a little bit later on the physical security part. So one of the things that we had to do when we were looking at this is we went through years and years and years worth of reports and data. and a lot of information that came from it. And then we also had the blessing of having the ability to talk to a lot of the folks that are the technical staff in all of the cities that have been deeply intermeshed in the management of Stanley Lake for all these years. So they have been incredibly helpful. And one of the things that I'm super happy about with this report is, it turns out none of us are getting younger. And you're going to have folks that are going to eventually retire. And so the nice part is that this report really pulled together all of those pieces that really help to inform how Stanley Lake got to the place where it's at right now. So that's really going to be great for knowledge management moving forward. And of course, we also went out to the lake to take a look at what was going on out there. So one of the very important factors that we had to take into consideration when assessing the lake management is the complexity of that lake. And like I said, I knew it was complex. In a long time ago, in a land far, far away, actually right here in the city, I worked for the city of Northglenn. This is where I started my career. So I got the opportunity to spend a little bit of time out there. I was a lot younger, way more collagen. Anyway, side note, I didn't realize how very complex it is, but the way that it works out is, of course, there's the complexity of the ownership of the water, and then there's the land, the physical assets such as the dam and the outlet structures and the pumps and the canals and other water conveyance structures. So this figure, it's kind of hard to read. You guys hopefully can see it closer on your monitors, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of the intricacies. So as you probably know, in Colorado, water is managed through water rights. Now, the lake itself, when it's full, can hold 42,743 acre-feet of water. And the three cities are shareholders to the Stanley Lake Division of the Farmers Reservoir and Irrigation Company, also known as FRICO. And as such, their pro rata portion of each one of their decreed water rights for Stanley Lake are as follows. So roughly, Westminster owns 52.5% of the total water, which is roughly 22,000 acre-feet. Thornton owns approximately 28% of the water, which is close to 12,000 acre-feet. Northglenn owns approximately 16% of the water in the lake, which is roughly, it's right around 6,900 acre-feet. And FRICO owns the remaining portion that's about 3.5% of the water, or 1,400 acre-feet. So the land immediately under the lake, this is where it gets interesting, is actually owned by FRICO. But the land surrounding the lake is owned by the city of Westminster. And also the ditches that bring water in, they're owned by various ditch companies. And just because we want to make it slightly more complicated, is Westminster then can manage the recreation on top of the lake and also what goes on around the lake. And then the outlet structure is actually owned by everybody. It's very interesting how the whole thing works. If you haven't had a chance to actually go and see the outlet structure, it's really impressive if you haven't gone and looked down the shaft. It's quite impressive. So let's see. So, oops, there we go. We took out some things, so that's okay. So I'm just gonna roll with it. So the other thing is that all of the water comes from Clear Creek and the Clear Creek watershed, and then of course is managed through the ditch companies. So one of the things that I really want to make sure that I point out, and it's so incredibly important before I get into these identified gaps, and I think that, again, I want to be able to state the good things that are going on out there. It is not incidental that there is high water quality in that lake. It has been on purpose, it has been intentional, and here's some of the examples that I want to give you that are not actually common. So you've had sustained collaborative funding for a very long time that has been able to make sure that things are getting done out at that lake. And one of those important things that has been a part of that sustained funding is the comprehensive water quality monitoring program that's going on out there. There is a ton of data, and that data has been used and analyzed and has been a huge resource for the different utilities to really understand what they need to do in terms of managing their intakes and when they're taking in water, and also what they can do to keep the water from becoming, from degrading. There is collaboration in Upper Clear with the watershed stakeholders, and that includes a formalized EMS or emergency management system or call down list, which is extremely important. In 9, the Colorado Water Quality Control Commission put forth a chlorophyll A standard. That was really important because that was the impetus for making sure that the upstream dischargers were actually going to make sure that nutrients were going to be managed on their end. So there was a number of things that happened there. And then you also have a very well-managed aquatic nuisance species program. In fact, I would venture to say it's probably one of the best in the state. And that happened, as we will find out, as a result of some Eurasian milfoil that ended up in the lake. So sometimes you have to have something happen to say, hey, maybe we ought to do something about this. So that was one of the things that happened. When we went through and we started to take a look at really where some of those gaps were, though, and there were a number of things that we point out, but I think it's always important. You can't do 1,000,010 things. What you need to do is you need to focus on the key things and be able to really make sure that you're prioritizing those. So one of the things that we definitely identified was you do have a lot of stakeholders engaged, and there isn't necessarily a comprehensive and cohesive public education program. I think when I state a lot of people may not be aware that this is the primary drinking water source for North Glen and Westminster. We need to do a better job of making sure that people understand that. So that way they just don't think that it's just a lake that we get to go and just have fun on. It actually serves in a higher purpose, which is drinking water. So one of the things that I do recommend is that we bring forward a communication program that's comprehensive, and some of that's already gotten started, which is great news. And while there is already a call down list that is for Upper Clear Creek, this is one of the top things that it was funny, staff all got together and I said, we have got to improve our call list that happens when there are things that happen actually at the lake. Recently, there have been a few things that have happened at the lake. There's been a few incidents that have been related to some physical security issues. And so there needs to be an improved call list, which is already being talked about and being moved forward. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about one of the things that's already in the works for that. Now, one of the greatest threats that is there for the lake, and unfortunately you have very limited control over this, is extreme events. And so when we talk about extreme events, we're talking about the worst of the worst, which is fire. And then if you have a fire in the watershed and it's immediately followed by a flood, that is going to be a huge impact to water quality. And then, of course, on the exact opposite end of that is drought. So a lot of times what we see is we see a drought that's decreased the amount of water that you have. It also tends to have impacts to water quality because you don't have as much water, then you have a fire, and then unfortunately, it seems like inevitably you end up with heavy rains that come afterwards. So one of the things that was identified is that right now, there is a process that is put in place for closing down those ditches when something happens upstream. So like, let's say there is a truck that rolls over, there's a call down list, and there can be a decision that's made whether or not you guys are going to keep those ditches open to keep bringing water in. It unfortunately takes a little bit of time to make a decision as to whether or not to shut those gates off. And the other real challenge is there's water rights that are also tied to shutting down those ditches. So one of the recommendations that we have for all of the cities is to get together and put together an agreement for how you're going to make decisions about shutting down those gates in the event that you have really bad water quality coming down. Now, I can tell you, sometimes the state says you have to take this water, whether you want to or not, and that recently happened literally this week. There was high turbidity, and because of concerns about the amount of water coming down Clear Creek, my understanding, and I am only coming at it from my understanding, is that it was a requirement. The state said you have to take the water. And unfortunately, that is also going to be then accounted towards the water that you would have already had as a part of your water rights. So that will lead me to the next thing that we need to figure out, which is if you're going to shut down the ditches, you have a plan in place for how that looks and how that happens. But then also you have something in place for what happens when it does impact water rights. And North Glen in particular, you guys have the smallest share of water. I would say that you want to make sure that if there's something that happens that makes it so you have to shut down those gates due to water quality, that there's something in place you guys have all agreed on that will help to restore the water rights issue that goes along with that. The other aspect is to really heavily consider what's going to happen when you don't have any choice but to take the water. And so one of the things that we're going to evaluate a little bit further, we couldn't do it in depth enough, is look at how we're going to capture sediments coming into the lake. And that's no easy lift, because there's a ton of development in the area already. So that is one of the things that we're going to consider looking at. And so I'm going to talk to you in a minute. So actually, it's right there on the screen. The early detection for ANS and a rapid response plan, in particular for upstream, would be very good. So you have a great ANS program out there. We really think you need to keep that going. We 100% think that that is going to be something that's going to be super important. One of the things that has happened since we put these slides together is the City of Westminster is moving forward with a workshop that's going to take place in the next couple of months, and we're still figuring out the date, where we're going to pull together the various cities and also the ditch companies, hopefully, to talk about how we move some of these things forward even more. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is some of the physical security aspects, but also things like the call down list, that where people can start to have a better understanding of, if there's an incident at the lake, who needs to be called and when. No, is that it? No, aha. Now let's talk about boating at Stanley Lake, because that happens to be something that a lot of people have thought about quite a bit. So the boating at Stanley Lake actually, well, first of all, let's go way back. Stanley Lake goes back to the early 1800s. The dam was finished in 1911, and there were repairs completed in 1922. It's not entirely clear when boats started on Stanley Lake, but we know that in 1970, Westminster began managing recreation on the lake, and at that time it was called Lake Park. And then 15 years later, in 1985, the city began actively managing boating recreation through a boating permit process. At that time, there were roughly 1,200 permits issued in 1985. However, a few years later, the number of available permits were cut in half, because at that time, they were already starting to have concerns about water quality on the lake. So there is, yes, this is a good one. So as you can see, this is going to give you reference to the fact that over the years since 1985, there's been a deliberate intent to reduce the number of permits on the lake. And then in 1994, when y'all signed the IGA, it did set limits for recreation, which was a part of decreasing the number of boat permits over time. And at that time, they also restricted boating recreation, such as jet skis and onboard sanitation devices. It also is important to note, in 1995 is when you had Eurasian milfoil come into the lake. And that is a noxious weed. You may or may not remember it, because for the folks that were here drinking the water at that time, it was causing taste and odor issues. And so there was a really good program that was put into place that was a biological control of Eurasian milfoil. And it's been very, very successful in managing the milfoil. And then in 1998, Stanley Lake was designated as a regional park. And then in 2008 is when you all started your ANS watercraft inspection. And so that has been incredibly helpful, because one of the things that we learned, and I will forever remember this is telling me how old I am, was when quagga and zebra mussels made it west, and we literally watched them go. Metropolitan Water District of Southern California watched them go through their canals out of Lake Mead all the way into where their lakes are. And the amount of money that was spent managing them was absolutely insane. So what we learned from that was, hey, these little guys have the capability of making it across land really easily. And once they actually make it into a water body, it is incredibly hard to manage them once they're there. So that was one of the things that was learned in 2008. And then in 2016, they started a on-site paddlecraft rental program that has been incredibly popular out there. And we can then look back just to 2019, when trailer powerboat use was suspended. As Tammy mentioned, the reason why it was suspended was because there were permit holders that had figured out how to circumvent the system. So that was unfortunate. And a collaborative advisory board was called and put together. Various people throughout the communities were put together, called the Stanley Lake Boating Task Force, and they met from April to November of 2019. And they tried their hardest to come up with a solution for how to keep boats on the lake, and there was really nothing that they could come up with that was a viable solution at that time. So then that takes us to 2020, when the 3 cities decided to amend it, the IGA, and restrict boating. I don't like to say, though, boating is restricted, right? Because there's only certain watercraft that are restricted, and that's the complex watercraft. That would be anything that has a bilge or a ballast, where water can actually go in, and it's very difficult to decontaminate. So hand-launched crafts are still fine for to be launched out there. In addition to, you can still have small electric engines that are under 70 pounds of thrust. So not all boating has been removed, and that's why we really think that we just need to make sure that we're telling people, yes, you can still go out there and there are boats, but they're hand-launched, they're not trailered, and they certainly are not power boats. And this is a great, this actually is the perfect way of being able to describe it. You can actually see the difference between hand-launched versus complex and very complex boats. So this has been determined, and it's throughout pretty much, it's the industry standard. If you want to keep critters out of your lake, this is the best way of doing it, unwanted aquatic nuisance species. Whoop, where am I at? There we go. So, yep, paddlecraft are allowed. Sailboats and wind-powered and small electric boats are all allowed out there. And if you go out there right now, you will note that there are quite a few. One of the things that has happened in just last year, and I have to give props to Holly Walters, who is the one that is managing recreation out at that lake. She has been able to pull in various groups like that are, I think that one of them is veterans and police officers with disabilities. And so there's an easy ADA compliant launch place so that we're starting to have more people be able to go out and enjoy the lake that wouldn't be able to do that type of paddling anywhere else because there are boats. So there's been a lot of really positive feedback from those groups that are getting to enjoy the lake. And currently not allowed. Aquatic bait is a problem because it's a vector. You never know what you're going to get in it. Belly boats, large electric motors, pretty much anything with a large motor, in addition to personal flotation devices, scuba diving. Those things are not allowed out there at the lake currently. And a part of the boating report was to talk about the benefits of boating. I think we can all agree that boating is a ton of fun, and it definitely does provide some revenue from the boaters that come in and enjoy it. There hasn't been a study done to actually determine whether or not there are additional people that are coming to the lake that didn't used to come because now they're able to enjoy it more for paddling. So we don't know what that offset really looks like in terms of, sales tax or anything else from people coming into the area. But the impacts are well known, and that's that it definitely is an increased risk of aquatic nuisance species, in addition to shoreline erosion is one of the other things. So I think one of the most important things that I want to point out, and this is something that staff has been very cognizant of, and they made sure that they had numbers to go behind their concerns. So in 2010, Westminster commissioned a study by HDR, and then it was updated again in 2018. And that study was really to look at what are the options in the event we get quagga and zebra mussels into this lake. And at the time, one of the things that we realized, or they realized, was that there were very few options that were available. We updated what those options were into $20, $22. And so really the most the most viable option right now that wouldn't have potential impacts to your wastewater treatment plant, because you always have to consider the entire system. The capital cost was $3.2 to $11.1 million, and that was just the capital cost. And the annual operating cost was right around $3.4 million. So it would add certainly additional cost if you were to ever face that. So it's a good enough reason to try to keep them out of your lake if you possibly can. Oh, and here are those options. There we go. I'm not going to read them all to you. You can just, I think the long and the short of it is this, the good news is that when we looked at this again in 2018, there has not really been anything that's been new that has come across that really is good for mitigating these, any type of quagga or zebra mussels once they make it in. And here are the full numbers. As I said, copper ion is it's a less expensive option on the front end. However, it's going to cause you major problems on your wastewater treatment plant for discharge. So to me, that is almost an out as it is, because then you're going to have upgrades to your wastewater treatment plant. So let's see. And then I think that one of the things, and I think this is a challenge just about anywhere you go, especially when you have a lake like Stanley Lake and you want to be able to have it continue to be used for recreation, because it's an incredible recreational asset for the Front Range, but you need to balance it with the risk. And so you just have to understand what your risk tolerance is. I think that there probably may be variable risk tolerance from one city to the next, and so therein lies where you guys get the opportunity to talk and negotiate those things. But the table that is over to the right, that is just kind of a brief snapshot of some of the lakes that are currently in the state that are drinking water and sole drinking water sources. So as you'll see, Evergreen Lake, and it is a sole drinking water source, they also they do not allow trailered boats. You can only have non-trailered boats. Aurora Reservoir, or Arvada Reservoir, sorry, is only simple watercraft. Gross, same thing. And so it's more common than not to see that you are not allowed to have motorized boats. Now, Chatfield is interesting because it was initially created for flood control. And so it was always a multi-use reservoir to start with. And so obviously they still definitely have motorized boating allowed for that lake. And that's that. This is the policy part for you.
Well, I do know we have a couple of questions. Is this a good pause point before we jump in?
Please,
Okay.
please.
First of all, I want to say thank you because you answered all of the questions that council had, right? And we love a good comparison. We always ask for that. So that last slide was really great. I see Councilmember Goff.
So my question is, you had mentioned some costs for, I guess, clearing the water if it was contaminated in these other possible ways. Was that just for North Glen, or is it just for the lake as a whole?
No, this was the total cost. So,
Okay.
and I think one of the other important things that I would like to bring up is those were costs that we've adjusted based on just regular cost increases, but it doesn't take into account now we've got a supply chain issue pretty much everywhere. So that might be even more than that. So yeah. So it would be divided though.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Also, thank you for that really informative presentation. So I do have a series of questions. I hope you indulge me.
Oh, good.
The first is, I was just looking at a map of the Clear Creek drainage.
Yes.
So, clearly upstream from Stanley Lake, you have other lakes, Georgetown. And so I'm just wondering, as part of your work in doing the assessment, all the way soup to nuts, do you look at other lakes in the drainage system?
We did not. That was not a part of our scope. So what did pull in those aspects were any existing reports. And the good news is there's actually quite a bit of information that's available on the Upper Clear Creek watershed that's already been developed. So we took that into consideration when we did this evaluation.
And do they allow boating on Georgetown Lake?
That is a great question, and frankly, I don't know the answer to it. I don't think so, but I don't know for sure.
I see Tammy nodding.
Georgetown Lake is like Stanley Lake and some of the other drinking water reservoirs, they allow non-motorized paddlecraft, that sort of thing, but they do not have motorized boats on Georgetown Lake.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question. And I asked a question of Tammy earlier today, so thank you for answering my email. So there's a decontamination procedure on the Westminster website. So while I was listening to you, I was also reading the decontamination procedure. It looks like all they're doing is essentially spraying the watercraft with hot water.
Yeah.
And I'm no marine biology expert, but I mean, is there a certain temperature of water, or are you just mechanically removing the larva and the
So
eggs?
it's a combination of the two, but the thing is, okay, so part of the reason why that method works for simple craft is there's no nooks and crannies for them to hide in. So the veligers, which are, basically the little baby Dreissenid mussels, they're not able to survive out of water for very long. And so it's when the reason they made it all the way over here, they made it very far on boats because they were able to get into the bilge water and stay there. So that is part of the reason why that works. Now, when they do that decontamination, it is extremely hot water, and it is also the pressure of the water that gets anything off. And we're not just worried about the Dreissenids, which is the quagga zebra mussels. We're also worried about even the smallest bit of like a piece of plant can end up becoming a problem. And so is it 100% foolproof? I honestly don't think you're going to get to 100% foolproof having anything on the lake, right? And that would include ducks, right? Because they can carry little things on their feet as well. So they can carry plants. So we can't talk the ducks out of landing. But I think but it does go back to kind of like that risk assessment and your risk tolerance, and to say, well, it's a lower risk when we do this. And we know for a fact that it has worked in areas across the country to help keep aquatic nuisance species off of lakes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And my last question, I'm a former Navy guy and a sailor, but sailboats do have bilges. So I'm a little bit concerned when I look at slide 10, where it says wind-powered sailboats are allowed.
It has to be hand launched, and so anything that is going to be small can make it onto the lake. So I understand what you're talking about, because if you get a larger sailboat, it's going to have a bilge in it
Yes.
also. So that is part of one of the criteria for being able to have a boat on the lake. Even though we do say sailboats, they do make sure that they do not have bilges. Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilmember Long.
Thank you. When we talk about the Clear Creek watershed, I know we don't get 100%. What percent do we get? Is there some way of measuring that or knowing what that is?
I don't know if I understand the question.
Is everything that comes on Clear Creek coming into our reservoir?
There is a little tiny bit of water that comes off of Kinnear. Yeah. So there's a little tiny bit of water, a little portion of the water that goes into Stanley Lake comes off of the Kinnear Ditch pipeline, and that is not from that watershed. But I would not be able to give you the exact, it's a very small percentage.
I guess I'm asking the question the wrong way. How much of the water that comes down the Clear Creek watershed comes into Stanley Lake?
Oh, so that is completely contingent on the water rights that are for the lake. So you're asking what portion of the water that comes down the lake. So it's going to depend on how much water is available to the shareholders that are in there based on priority rights. So they're only going to be able to pull off whatever it is that they can pull off. So if it's a drought year and somebody has junior rights and somebody further downstream has senior rights, they're not going to be able to pull the water, possibly. It all boils down to whether or not you have the water rights at the time. And Shelley, who is also here, is going to be able to speak more, or Tammy. Shelley or Tammy, about North Glen's specific water rights.
Sure. That's a really difficult question, and Shawnee really hit the nail on the head about water rights and Clear Creek. North Glen has its chunk of water rights. Westminster and Thornton also have their own chunk of water rights. The amount of water that we take down the Crow Canal, Farmers High Line, and the Church Ditch when those ditches are in season really depends on the water rights that we own and the volume of flow coming down Clear Creek. So in the summertime, or actually during the spring when runoff is high, the amount of water based on our water rights that we get to take from Clear Creek is greater because there's more water available in the stream as stream flows kind of narrow down during the fall and winter. The amount of water that we can take into Stanley Lake from Clear Creek decreases based on those stream flows and the amount of water rights that we have available. So it's not a set number every year. It's simply based on stream flows, what's available, and what our water rights allow.
I'm still not getting the right answer.
It's,
Maybe you can help me, attorney. You know what I'm asking?
I don't, and
Okay.
I'm probably
So there's
not.
Okay, let me just make a picture here. There's 100% of the water coming down Clear Creek.
yeah,
It's a great fishery, by the way. It's good
It
trout
is.
fishing, and I've enjoyed it
Yeah.
through the years. Of all the water that comes down Clear Creek,
yeah,
from way up there,
yeah.
how much of all of that water comes into Stanley Lake? 50% of it, 40%, 30%? How much goes to whoever else might be on the other side of that? Other people get Clear Creek
So
water?
we're going to give you a really unsatisfying answer. And I swear I'm not dodging the question. It is all about,
Let me give this away.
thank you.
I'm just gonna try. I
Give it a
think
shot.
maybe listening, I understand. So all the water that comes, Colorado is first in, first out. So all the water, except for that little sliver from Stanley Lake, all of it comes from Clear Creek. But that water then gets put back in for the next user down. So if your question is how much of the water from Clear Creek goes to Stanley Lake, all of it that we use, but the water continues to go down to the next user as well. There's not a way to, I don't think there's a way to.
I'm just saying, is there anybody above us that takes a share before
Everybody
we
does.
get up?
Yes.
Everybody takes it, right?
Yeah.
Englewood gets it, Golden
That's
gets
right.
it, all
That's
like
You
that?
were exactly right, and that's the rules of water rights. They take it and then they put it back in. We get it, we put it back in. The next person takes it, they put it back in. All the way through Colorado, all the way down until it gets to Nebraska.
So they take their share, and then what's left comes down to us? If there was a drought year and it
It's the
got,
same amount. Well, again, that's why we have the water treatment plant and the augmentation. So whatever we take out minus consumption, we put back in. And then the next user takes it.
I'm going to interject here on
Go
this
ahead.
one too. So in the time of drought, that you bring up a really interesting question there because Kent is right. Golden will take their water and then they put a portion that they don't use back in. And we take our portion to Stanley Lake and we use what we use and then we're required to put a portion back into the river. That's the water right plus the augmentation plan. During droughts, what we really see here in Colorado is the priority system where it's first in time, first in right, that kicks in. So what that means is the water user along Clear Creek that has the oldest water right gets the first priority. North Glen, Thornton, Westminster, we are incredibly fortunate because during times of drought, our water right is very, very senior on Clear Creek. And so we get the priority for water, even above some of our upper Clear Creek users. So water rights in Colorado are super complicated and it's, not long ago before you came on board, I gave a Water Rights 101 for council, and it's a very helpful discussion that hopefully we'll be able to do again soon so that yourself and Councilmember Burns can kind of get looped in on that. But water rights in Colorado is not as simple as you're above me, so you get water first, and then I get water after you're done with it. It works that way, but it's not quite that simple. And the question about that percentage, it's really hard to say the percentage of Clear Creek water that ends up with North Glen and in Stanley Lake, simply because of how water rights in Colorado work.
Wow.
It's very, so when I said that the lake will hold up to 42,000 acre feet, that's if you can fill it. And there's no guarantee in the state of Colorado you're going to get to fill it because of the senior water rights. And as she said, the first in rights, first in time. When we've run into drought years, and you guys are in great shape, I've worked for and with municipalities that had very junior rights. And there were a lot of people in public works crying themselves to sleep in pillows a few years because they couldn't pull the water because they didn't have the right to actually pull the very little amount of water that was in the streams.
I'll just stop.
Get you a private tutorial.
So fine.
All right, thank you. I think we're ready to move ahead.
All right, thank you.
Oh, okay, so I think that we've kind of had this conversation previously, but with Shawnee here and with David and Chris from Surveillance One, going to be offering us a conversation about physical security and those kind of risks and efforts that are going to be, that may be required to take greater risk on Stanley Lake. I thought it would be kind of very helpful to throw out the questions to you, and maybe this is not a discussion for this evening out of sake of, out of the matter of time, and I don't want to keep all of us here for hours and hours, but a couple of questions that, we'd like to throw out to you and kind of keep in your mind. What is the level of risk that North Glen is comfortable with when it comes to protecting our water supply? We've had this conversation in the past, and I've gotten a very strong affirmative. This city council is very committed to protecting our water supply, but that is a conversation. As you learn more about the physical security and the steps that we can take, if we're willing to accept more risk, what that risk is. And then the other question to kind of really keep in your mind and to think about as we move forward with, this particular conversation and working with our partners in Thornton and Westminster is what is the message that we choose to send to our neighboring communities and their city councils about our value of water supply and what we feel is important. So just a couple, I know we have it here as a discussion, but just definitely something for you all to think about going forward. We've kind of come to a lull, and we sent our letter to the city of Westminster, and kind of things have quieted down for now, but this may be a topic of conversation that comes back to you at some juncture, and these are good points for you all to keep in mind as we move forward in the future with this conversation about Stanley Lake and risk.
So real quick, I wasn't sure if that was an open discussion because we have another agenda item later on. Do you want to have that discussion now or later?
It may be better informed later after the discussion in executive session, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but as a reminder, the current direction of council, as evidenced by a letter that was sent to Westminster in the not too distant past, is no trailered boating, no risk of mussel infestation as best we can control it. And so that is certainly the current position that has been conveyed to Westminster.
Okay. Well, I mean, we can do a quick check-in before we move out of the study session, just to share. Mayor Pro Tem had said, my stance is still the same, zero tolerance for anything that could affect our water supply. No boating, no nothing. To quote her, she was out sick today. Councilmember Kondo?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm really intrigued by page 15, because there's 3 flavors of risk. And I wonder if we could bring our subject matter expert back up here, Shoni, or anybody.
I moved with a limp. Sorry, I was slow.
That's okay. Because when we were first thinking about this, I was thinking about it from the risk capacity, the dollar sign. So I'm really interested in getting educated about the other 2 flavors of risk, where you have risk appetite, the need, and then also the psychological aspect
Right.
of risk tolerance. If you can
Sure.
kind of help me
Yeah,
understand that
Yeah,
better.
absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, the first one definitely, it kind of speaks for itself. When we talk about risk appetite, is this a risk that you need to take, like when we're talking about recreation, such as bringing boats onto the lake? Is it something you guys have to do? I mean, because I think that sometimes you have to take risks because you have no other choice. And so you try to manage those risks as best as possible. So that's one of the factors to take into consideration. And then just in general, you need to understand and you need to have an understanding of what your total overall risk tolerance is within the city for a variety of things. Now, I know because I've seen some back of the napkin calculations for what the value of your water is. It is definitely, it appears to be one of the, because you do have really good senior water rights, which are really expensive, it happens to be one of your most expensive assets that you have. So I think that that would probably play a role in terms of the amount of tolerance that you have, because the unfortunate part is, not just in the state of Colorado, but pretty much throughout the western United States, you can't just easily go and get another water source someplace else. So the fact that you guys are in a good position with good water rights and you have a very forward-looking staff that's also saying, well, what happens in the worst case scenario? We can't get water because it's a drought year. They're already looking into that through the ASR program and everything else that is coming up. And so kudos to the team for that. So it really all has to be all of those parts that you need to take into consideration when you're considering the risk.
So if I were to, just to interact with you here, seems like we as a city, our risk appetite is probably, that might be NA, because it's like none of our residents can give a hoot as to whether they can put a boat on Stanley Lake or not. Or at least it doesn't seem like that's a
Well,
significant.
so I did pull numbers in terms of the number of residents in the city that actually have a boating permit, and it was roughly 1% of the residents in Northglen that had, it was like a 1.2% or something like that. Interestingly, the majority of the boating permits, it's on a back there, actually come from the city of Arvada, which is not even, that they're not water shareholders is the best way of looking at it. They're certainly stakeholders for the lake, but they don't have, it doesn't impact them if something happens to water quality.
Yeah, that's interesting that they can enjoy all the benefit, but their risk is very low.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, just in terms of the overall recreation enjoyment for motorized boats, it's important to say that City of Northglen residents appear to have a fairly low, they're not getting the permits, is the moral of the story.
Because I was just doing that math real quick here,
Yeah.
of 38,000 people, although probably children don't have boat permits. It's like less than
If you guys
0.5%.
would like, I can actually share with you, it doesn't have to be now, I can get it to you, the actual breakdown of the permit holders.
Yeah, that would be fine, not
Yeah,
now. but-
yeah.
So, and then as far as the risk tolerance piece, I'm really intrigued by psychological.
Yeah.
So is that like the pucker factor, knowing that we only have one straw that goes there, and if it gets jammed up with quagga mussels, that's it? And so psychologically,
Yeah.
that can be really devastating
It
on
is.
the psyche.
I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's kind of the difference between like a teenage boy and me, right? Like a teenage boy's going to they're psychologically, they're like, it's going to be fine. Whereas I'm like, oh, I'm old, I'll break. So, I think that there is a psychological component that goes into how organizations determine whether or not they're going to have a tolerance for risk. Inevitably, again, like I said, you can never go to zero risk on just about anything. Coming here, we took a risk, but you also have to be cognizant of what that tolerance is for yourselves and your residents.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
And I'm not invincible either. I used to think I was, but I'm not anymore.
Councilmember Long.
Again, I'm sorry.
Don't want to be sorry.
Ahead of time. Is this question about risk, is this all about boating? Is that what we're really talking about?
That was one of the key drivers to this slide specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'd have to side with Mayor Pro Tem in her statement. I mean, no way, no boating, zero, zip, nada.
You all will have the opportunity, I think, to entertain another discussion when the IGA comes up for renegotiation, and I believe that's in 2030. 2030,
Okay.
yes.
I have a follow-up on that.
Okay,
In a place like that, there are going to be critters, non-aquatic critters.
yes,
And so pests, what have you.
yeah.
They roam, raccoons, whatever might be in the water. We have a good control there. We watch that.
So again, we don't have a firm handle on how to manage the raccoons and the ducks. They kind of do their outdoor wildlife critter thing. However, dogs are something that people have control over, and they are not allowed in the lake. And I can tell you, try taking your dog into Stanley Lake, and you will be immediately met by a park ranger.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we stock the lake too?
Yeah, I don't.
Does Division of Wildlife stock the lake?
Occasionally, I don't remember.
I don't know the last time that I heard that they've stocked it. It has a fairly substantial natural fish population
Yeah.
without being stocked.
Oh.
Yeah. It does pretty good.
Oh.
Yeah, people enjoy fishing out there. Yep.
Then the last question is, has there ever been consideration, given that the sediment does gather in the bottom of the lake, it's only natural? Has there been any conversation about the potential of dredging
Dredging
it
it.
ever?
Oh, boy.
Ever? Or is this a whole topic I should
Well,
not
let
even
me,
ask?
so has there been concerns about filling in of sedimentation? The answer is 100%. Yes, there is a concern about filling in of sedimentation, which is part of the reason why one of the things that technical staff is always concerned about is taking water that's high in turbidity, because that's going to certainly add to sedimentation in the lake. And so that's part of the reason why they want to start really investigating various options for trapping sediment before it makes it into the lake. Because that definitely, it has two things. It definitely is going to reduce capacity, and it also definitely impacts, if y'all remember the floods of 2013, that happened to be one of the worst situations that happened to that lake in a very long time, because some of the conventional treatment could not deal with the turbidity. And Westminster in particularly struggled with that. And so you want to keep turbidity out of that lake as much as humanly possible for a few reasons. And filling in of the lake is one of them. It definitely will eventually impact capacity. And you are not in a great place to say, we'll just lower the lake and dredge it, which some places can do when they have alternate sources of water, but that's your only source of water. So it's not really feasible to lower the lake and dredge it.
Because you stir it up.
Yeah, and not only that, but where would the water go? Because that's where you store your water and you count on it being there for drinking water purposes.
Shawnee, can I add in
Yes.
on that too? We have had discussions about the potential of dredging. It's been a number of years, but one of the drivers that keeps the Stanley Lake cities and FRICO from dredging Stanley Lake is the presence of radionucleoides in the sediments
Forgot, yes,
from Rocky Flats. So when the Rocky Flats weapons plant was in operation, unfortunately, we did have radionuclides, plutonium, uranium, and americium particularly, that came through the watersheds around Stanley Lake and into Stanley Lake. Fortunately, radionuclides bind to sediments and settle to the bottom, and so long as we don't stir up the sediments, those radionuclides stay at the bottom. Dredging is a surefire way to stir up the nutrients and bring those radioactive compounds into our drinking water supply. So we are very, very, very hesitant to take on dredging activities on Stanley Lake for that particular reason.
It's understandable. Thank you.
Councilmember Jaramillo?
Thank you, Mayor. As a kid who used to go to Stanley Lake back in the day when the boats were allowed, I understand we cannot compromise our water at all. Even though it was a lot of fun, but there's still a lot of fun things we can still do there. I'm looking at daily paddle passes from May 1st to September 30th from 7 a.m. till sunset. You can rent canoes, kayaks, paddle boards from $20 to $25 an hour, or get a pass for $125, or for seniors, $100 for your paddle boards.
Yep.
That's cool. I'm already making plans with friends right now. I'm talking about this.
Well-
I'm like, let's rent paddleboards and go
And
to Stanley
what's
Lake.
really cool, and I don't have the numbers here, and I apologize for that, but there's actually been an increase in the number of daily permit holders coming in because it went from being a lake where paddle boarders were competing with power boats to now it's like a premier place to go, like stand up paddleboarding or canoeing or whatever else. So they've seen an increase in those permits. Now, naturally, the revenue is higher from boating permits than what you're going to get from a day pass. So revenue is down in that area, but there is increased usage.
Makes sense, but hey, it started May 1st, so. I mean,
Get out there. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sounds like fun.
Research.
Yeah. I'm finished.
Sounds good. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on. I'm going to adjourn the study session, but hopefully log into your voting system real fast.
Move to adjourn.
We don't have to move
Oh,
to
no.
adjourn. I'm just adjourning the study
just
session.
Okay.
I will now call to order the special city council meeting of May 15th, 2023. Lisa, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Lighty,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lukeman Hiramasa is absent. Councilmember Long,
Here?
Councilmember Jaramillo.
Here.
Councilmember Kondo,
Here.
Councilmember Burns,
Here.
Councilmember Goff,
Here.
Councilmembers Brown and Walker are absent.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Section 4.5D of the City of North Glen Home Rule Charter for legal consultation and advice regarding the Stanley Lake Security Assessment.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn is so stated.
Second.
Wow, battle there for a minute. Please open the vote.
Well, for
there
once,
you
I
go.
think I'm going
Vote
fast.
is open. Sorry about that.
That's okay, please vote.
And the vote is closed, and the motion to adjourn to executive session passes unanimously.
We will adjourn to the executive session. So we're going to break down